In Ireland, over wood and mire, in the tower tall and grey, the knell of Clonfert's bell was tolling in green Galway. St. Brendan had come to his life's end under a rain-clad sky, and journeyed whence no ship returns, and his bones in Ireland lie. We're here in Clonfert in East Galway, the Clonfert mentioned in the stanza I just read from a poem by J.R.R. Tolkien about the death of St. Brendan. This place is especially famous for this magnificent Romanesque doorway, similar in style to the doorway in Coleshin, which you can learn more about here. Clonfert does indeed seem to be the resting place of St. Brendan, known also as St. Brendan the Navigator, a 6th century saint who became famous throughout Europe during the High Middle Ages, thanks to a story about him known as the Navigatio, which tells of a sea journey carried out by Brendan and his monks west of Ireland in search of an island called the Land of Promise of the Saints. That story ends up being translated from Latin into Catalan, Norse, various Italian dialects and Middle Dutch. Now it's important to point out that this story was first written down several hundred years after the death of Brendan, and it includes lots of fantastical elements that seem to be borrowed from well-known voyaging legends, rather than purporting to give a historical account of Brendan's journey. There's no reason to doubt, though, that Brendan really did have one or more adventurous journeys on the sea. We know that the early Irish church valued the practice of peregrinatio, of leaving behind your homeland. And we know for sure that a little after Brendan, Irish monks are sailing into the open sea and arriving at previously unknown islands like Iceland and the Faroe Islands. And in this atmosphere of sea travel with spiritual intentions, it's St. Brendan who's recognised as the pioneer. Already in the 9th century in Tallaght, there's a feast kept in honour of the departure of St. Brendan and his household. Whatever historical core there might have been, though, the literary version of St. Brendan's journey is a fascinating story. The main body of the story tells of the adventures of Brendan and his gang as they search for the Island of Promise. They meet birds who sing the divine office, islands of fire and ice. They pick up beautiful fruits and gems, and they land on one island which turns out not to be an island at all. Spoiler alert, it's a whale. But all this time we know it's not a journey in vain, because the whole story starts off with a monk called Berinthus who has just returned from the Island of Promise. He tells Brendan about this perfect place where he met a monastic community who lived in utter simplicity and joy, united in faith, hope and love. And it's after hearing this that Brendan decides to head west. He gathers 14 monks into his chapel and he explains, "My heart and mind are firmly set upon one desire. If it be God's holy will, I have in my heart resolved to go forth in quest of the land of promise of the saints. What do you think? What is your advice?" And they replied together, "Father Abbot, your will is our will also. Have we not forsaken our parents? Have we not committed into your hands even our very bodies? We are ready to go with you, whether to life or to death, provided only we find such to be the will of God." So this adventure is not a matter of mere curiosity, but it's also a search for spiritual perfection. These adventurers are willing to risk everything, motivated by this immense desire to find spiritual fulfillment, perfect praise, unity and wisdom. Their voyage is not a break from their monastic life, in other words, but it's an intensification of it. In the end, they do in fact get to the Island of Promise of the Saints after 7 years of wandering. Just before they do, they enter a zone of intense darkness, and after sailing through that dark cloud, they come into a great light and disembark on a land rich in fruit and always brightly lit. They spend 40 days on this beautiful island, but they can't traverse it. They find a river which they cannot cross, so the full extent of the land of promise remains a mystery to them. Then at the river, a young man with a shining face comes up to them and embraces them joyfully. He knows all their names, and he says to each of them, "Peace be with you." He tells St. Brendan that this is the land he was seeking, but that it took him such a long time to find it because Christ wanted first to show him various mysteries along the way. Now, he says, they were to return to the land of their birth, but carrying with them the fruits and gems they gathered on the way. They will return, he says, at the end of time. It's a wonderful story, and it gives expression to so much of our human condition, our desire for perfection, our willingness at our best to make great efforts in search of perfection, and the value of each and every experience along the way of life. And it presents God beautifully too, not as a distant taskmaster, but as the object of desire, the giver of gifts, the one who guides us in his providence. It's easy to see why this story of spiritual adventure became a medieval bestseller. And it's easy too to see how inspirational it was for two of the great Christian fantasy writers of our time, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. We've already heard a bit of Tolkien's poem on St. Brendan, and it's a story he retold in various ways throughout his career. And it will be clear to anyone who's read Tolkien how the themes of the Navigatio play out in the world of his legendarium. As for Lewis, in one of his notebooks he lists the sources of his Narnia story, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. There are just two items on the list: Homer's Odyssey and the story of St. Brendan. Now, the direction of the Dawn Treader's voyage might be different from Brendan's, but the outline and ethos is very similar. For both of these writers, the purpose of fantasy and adventure stories was ultimately to send you back to reality with a greater enthusiasm for ordinary life. The author of the Navigatio would surely agree. The story of Brendan was meant to spark desire and to send the reader back to reality with armfuls of gems and exotic fruit, ready to live ordinary life faithfully until death, longing always for the unveiling of paradise at the end of time.